But let's like shift now into some of the rumors that are coming out of Lucasfilm and what those rumors could mean for the future of Star Wars. Who wants to kick us off with this?
Go ahead, Dre. You start off. Let's get the party started.
Yeah.
Okay, so Lucasfilm first, then Parks, right?
Let's do it.
Yeah. Okay, here we go.
Let's do it.
All right. Well, we just talked about timelines, and you know what? There is kind of this Mandoverse here, right? This section of the timeline that is building towards something bigger, but does that intersect with the sequel trilogy? Because obviously at this point it would have to, and they've already taken sequel trilogy iconography, creatures, characters, all that kind of stuff, and have integrated it in here already. So we know that timeline exists, and those characters and those creatures exist and all that. But are we necessarily going towards that, or is there a chance for a bifurcation? It's interesting, right? Here we go. This comes from Cameron Pasha via his Sparrow contact, which apparently is... Oh, go ahead. Okay.
Well, I was just saying, kind of set up for the audience, in case they're not familiar, what Sparrow is exactly.
Yeah, that is Cameron Pasha's inside person at Lucasfilm. Apparently, he alludes to them being a kind of higher up executive who would kind of be privy to a lot of this information. Apparently, they actually met. So this is not some rando on the internet. Apparently, this is somebody that Cameron swears by. They've met. They've verified that, yes, they actually do work at Lucasfilm, and that just them communicating at all could, it could cost Sparrow their job, let's just say, right? So, okay, that's kind of the groundwork right here. This is what they say. Okay, Sparrow reveals what is really happening with Rey. So I just got back word from my Disney insider Sparrow on the future of Rey in Star Wars. And the news is both surprising and not surprising at all. And here's what they said. Quote, "She is being considered to be brought in for Ahsoka, but just for her Thanos moment when the timeline is changed." End quote. That's all that Sparrow says. Cameron extrapolates from that. The eye of Pasha has pierced the dark cloud to reveal the truth. Jon Favreau is indeed considering bringing Daisy Ridley back for the Ahsoka series, but only as part of his effort to erase the original timeline in which she existed. While Rey's brief return may shock and perhaps outrage some fans, it makes perfect sense from a writer's perspective. In order to show the old timeline erased, we need to see it and know its implications. Erasing the sequel timeline will lead to Rey never being born, and that has to be dealt with dramatically. As a writer, I would tie it up in a similar fashion in order to make sure no questions remain as to whether the old timeline is still in play. And it also creates dramatic gravitas for the character of Ahsoka, knowing that her choice to end one timeline will save millions of lives, while ending the lives of others who only existed because of Palpatine's escape from death. And perhaps Rey will have a heroic moment where she encourages Ahsoka to go through with it, and thus sacrificing herself for the galaxy, and finally getting to be a true heroine. This may not be the news that everyone wanted to hear, but it makes sense from a storyteller's perspective, and I trust that Jon Favreau will finally give Daisy Ridley, a fine actress, a script where she can show her full range of emotions, depth, and growth as a thespian. Miss Ridley deserved better than the garbage script she was given in the sequel trilogy. That's a little bit of a writer's interpretation there, and I hope she gets a dignified send-off that she can be proud of. Guys, what are we thinking about this?
This is risky. I mean, this is risky, but okay. There's pros and cons to doing this. Absolutely. Okay, you're basically going to kind of, well, you're not kind of, you're retconning the sequel trilogy, right? There's a pro side to this where they can get a second chance at doing this right. But we all know, I mean, every fan knows that they didn't really have a plan going into the sequel trilogy. Every director kind of did its own thing, and it kind of led to a mess, right? So by kind of going down this path, the story device, and kind of retconning the sequel trilogy, it gives Filoni and Favreau a chance to do their sequel trilogy, mapping it out from the beginning and doing it better than what we got originally. Okay, so that sounds great, but there are risks involved. Number one, if you don't stick the landing this time, that's like catastrophic for the franchise. I mean, catastrophic.
There's no redemption there if you screw it up.
There's no redemption. I mean, you completely nuked the franchise. Now, another thing that I think would be really, really unfortunate is that we don't have Carrie Fisher around anymore.
Yeah.
So if they were to kind of do a redo of the sequel trilogy, it would be they would have her character, I'm sure, but it would probably be an AI or something. That's unfortunate, in my opinion. That's really disappointing. But I don't know. I mean, look, I've been a big proponent of, like, you don't need to retcon the sequel trilogy. What you can do, what kind of George Lucas did with the prequels. And what George Lucas did with the prequels is that he created ancillary material that sort of filled in the blanks and gave a little more context to the prequels that made the prequels better. So the Clone Wars show made the prequel era better. People appreciated the prequels more because of the Clone Wars. I think you could do a similar thing with the sequels, because there are good things in the sequels. They're not all bad. A lot of the characters are great. I love Ben Solo and Kylo. You know, there's good stuff there. If you create, like, let's say a Disney Plus show, or even maybe like a standalone movie that's sort of filling in some gaps and sort of making the sequel trilogy story tighter, I think that would work, and you wouldn't have to reboot necessarily. So I don't know. I'm open to really creative, bold ideas. I'm not completely averse to retconning the sequel trilogy and kind of going in a different direction if they have a really dope idea for it. But I don't necessarily think it's necessary. I think you could do the George Lucas prequel direction as well. But that's kind of where I stand. Fascinating, theory though, or notion. I mean, it's crazy to even think about.
Jay, go ahead.
Yeah, if I were Disney, the only way that I touch the sequel trilogy at all is in what OG said, is working around it without retconning it. And the reasons for that is because, look, it's sort of similar to the Cara Dune conversation, if we're being honest. Any kind of retconning that comes with it is going to bring all the videos, all the attention, it's just sometimes you should just let sleeping dogs lie. And if you've got other people who, look, I would watch, let's be really clear. The problem with the sequel trilogy had nothing to do with, John Boyega as Finn. It had nothing to do with Daisy Ridley as Rey. It had nothing to do with Oscar Isaac as Poe Dameron. Those were really interesting characters played by really talented individuals. Kylo Ren played by Adam Driver. But the story was a disaster, right? Yeah. I think that you ignore that altogether and that you work around it. I don't think you're ever going to get Harrison Ford back in another movie. Are you kidding me? After you did what you did with him in this one, I think he's good. You're obviously not going to, rest in peace, Carrie Fisher. We can't get her back. Right. I think that the only person who's more willing to come back into a role would be Mark Hamill, right? Mm-hmm. But I think you could easily do a show that Mark Hamill is older and working with Daisy in some way, shape, or form, right? Like, I think you could tell those stories, but I don't think that it's going to touch, whether or not Palpatine came back, how Palpatine is related to Rey or not related. I just don't think you even go there, right? Like, come up with new villains, put those people against new villains. It's good. We're fine. We forget it. We go, that was a bummer. We move on from it. That's kind of my take on it. Now, I understand Disney's motivation in trying to get people back to an excitement about the sequel trilogy because of the Batuu conversation. That's really what that comes down to, is they have a park area that is maybe not underperforming, but it's definitely not performing as well as it could if it had a different era associated with it, or if the sequel trilogy had managed to land the plane well and people were excited about it. So I think that from my perspective, they do need to do something. Now, see, in my personal view of things, going backwards is better than going forwards, because you can go back to there is not a single person that I've ever heard say, you know what I really really hate about Star Wars? The Old Republic stuff. There's like no one has ever said that.
Yeah, nobody.
So I think for me personally, I go, look, you got a lot more ability to branch out by going backwards than you do by going forwards.
Of course.
So that's kind of where I think Disney should kind of hang out or angle their storytelling. But I would not be opposed to Daisy Ridley coming back as Rey or Poe Dameron or whatever.
You know what I would love, though, in terms of ancillary material for the sequel trilogy? I would love like a really short, maybe like a 3 or 4 episode miniseries for D+. Get Ian McDermott back and have the whole, I would like to see his whole contingency plan kind of better explained. Like that was one of the things in the sequel trilogy that I thought was really lackluster. Like, you know, oh, somehow Palpatine returned. I think Poe literally says that. It wasn't explained well. It was kind of gobbledygook. I kind of want to get in Palpatine's head. I want to see what was going on with that. That's kind of interesting to me. And plus I just love Palpatine. So it'd be great to see him in a series. Go ahead, Dre.
I think because here's the thing. I do agree with you, Jay. I think backwards rather than forwards is the natural place to go. That's why they're kind of dipping their toes into a little bit with the High Republic. Okay, all right. OG. Play Knights of the Old Republic, and you tell me where they should go. All right. Once you're done with that, you're gonna be like, what? I didn't even know this existed. Yeah. Okay.
It's like Game of Thrones with lightsabers, basically, right?
It's so good. I'm telling you, it's so good. And the Mandalorian and Jedi conflicts and the Sith. Okay. So, all right. I think the way to go forward is not to completely retcon and throw out the sequel trilogy. It obviously exists. But if you want to bifurcate the timeline and say the Mandoverse is going in this direction, even though this still exists in some continuity and on Blu-ray, okay. I think that can go. And the upside to doing that is, well, if you like the sequel trilogy, it's still there. Mm-hmm. And if you like where this is going to go, here's a route for this to take. You can capitalize on maybe some of the promises that were made for the sequel trilogy, do them better, because there are some concepts in there that like could be really cool. Now you have a way to capitalize on those and to make people excited about the sequel trilogy again, like you said, Jay. But also, too, because you don't have a destination, that journey can take all the routes it wants to go. Mm-hmm. And so it kind of opens you up a little bit and says, hey, this, just because we're progressing through the years towards a sequel trilogy type place in the timeline doesn't mean we're going to hit the beats like you think we are going to. Like, it was the same thing that the prequel trilogy, let's say, was bound by, right? Eventually, we know where everybody ends up, and that's kind of what makes that kind of thing unfortunate. But hey, if you have like a Daisy Ridley, maybe not Daisy Ridley, but maybe like a Poe die at some place where he wasn't supposed to, it's like, like now this is interesting. Like this, now we can, anything can happen kind of thing. And I think they want that, but the sequel trilogy as it exists today prevents that from happening unless they can bifurcate. And there are systems in place in Star Wars that can allow them to do just that.
They also like from a standpoint of where they could go with things, the nice thing about the sequel trilogy is that it is not galaxy encompassing. It is two fairly small factions. We don't get a big faction until Palpatine says, "I'm like raising the dead of like the every you know what I mean?" Like,
well, that was the confusing part, because Last Jedi was like, "Oh my God, they're taking over the entire galaxy," and it's like,
well, that's the problem.
We don't see that. Yeah, there was no. We need to zoom out, and they just never did that with.
Well, in the first couple films, they even made a point of saying, "Look, these two factions just keep fighting each other, but they're kind of both small and don't have a lot of consequence. Not the way the Empire does in the original trilogy, or the way the Republic does in the prequel trilogy. Those are those are like I say global force, but you know what I mean, like they're universe wide, galactic wide forces. Whereas in the sequel trilogy, you got the impression that there could be a lot of stories going on that
are more interesting. No, joking.
Well, it definitely could be more interesting for sure, but also less like you could easily take the Acolyte series, let's say, and say it's going to be in the sequel trilogy timeline, and it's going to be about something that's really, really important that doesn't have anything to do with the First Republic and doesn't have anything to do with the Resistance, and it would be very compelling. I don't think you need to have it. I mean, look what they did with Mandalorian. This whole time in this Mandalorian timeline, like he's not worried about what the It's not worried about any of this stuff. So I think you can do some pretty compelling stuff in there. And actually, Michael brings up a really good question, Dre. How would that work? What are you said that there were some things that exist in the Star Wars universe that could allow the bifurcation to happen in a way that is not too awkward. What are some of those things?
Yeah, so I think the obvious one, well, I mean, you know, we've had this thing before where it's like, well, this exists in Legends, and now this is no longer continuity. This exists in some timeline, but it's not ours that we're actively working on, right? So, like they've done that kind of thing before, not with their own product, although they could. The other kind of obvious thing is there's a Worlds Between Worlds type device. I believe it was introduced in Rebels originally. That you know, you can kind of play with, and things happen there. Let's just say that. Look up that episode. I encourage everybody to watch it. But that's kind of a way that this kind of thing can happen, in which you bring a character out, like Daisy Ridley, for example, from that timeline, and say, hey, look, listen, what happens in the future, because I'm getting bad premonitions about something that might happen. It's like, oh, let me tell you. Go to the World Between Worlds, which Ahsoka was part of, by the way. And I think that's why Ahsoka, the TV series, people are kind of making the connections. Okay, like she was brought in via the World Between Worlds. I think, wasn't she was having her sparring match with Darth Vader at that time. And was it Ezra who
pulled her out?
Pulled her out of it? Okay, yeah. I'm trying to remember that. That's kind of how that can work as well. Look, is it going to be clean? Probably not. But I think people are more invested in the Mandoverse right now than at all with the sequel trilogy. I think people can understand that. And honestly, we've had some time, some distance between where we are right now and where the last movie took place in 2019.
Well, I'll tell you what they can do tomorrow if they wanted to do the World Between Worlds kind of idea, to kick off another timeline. There's the moment when Rey is in the cave in The Last Jedi, and she does the clicking, and then all the clicking goes across. All you have to do is spin the camera around and show all those rays leaving and going in different directions.
Oh, that's cool.
And then there's your scene. You can go into whatever you want to with Rey at that point, because she doesn't go the same direction in all the possibilities.
Yeah, you could totally do it.
Yeah, they've got the opportunity to do it, but
that's why leadership, and we'll get into leadership, but that's why leadership is very important, because Star Wars has an infinite amount of potential. And a lot of people say Star Wars is dead. It's not dead. It's not dead. When they do Star Wars right, we see how powerful Star Wars is. Look at Grogu, like one of the most influential things in pop culture in the longest time. When Star Wars is done right, it's huge. I just think that they haven't been making the right product necessarily, and that's why it's falling flat. It's kind of like Disney animation in the 80s, right before Little Mermaid, even in the 70s. The films weren't doing well. They were flopping at the box office. Like Care Bears movie was outperforming Disney. It wasn't that people hated Disney animation in the 70s and 80s. It was that they weren't making a product people were really into. The franchise was hibernating. Same thing with Star Wars. If you can tap into something, it can be huge. It would dwarf Marvel. It really would, if you do it right.
And Micah, but that's basically what it would be, like an MCU multiverse. But here's the thing about this, okay? And OG, you just said it right there. leadership. You got to have people who know the franchise very, very well, what to pull from, where to pull from, when to pull from, and what the fans might be interested in seeing. And that would translate to a broader audience as well. Kevin Feige does this masterfully, or he did for quite a while. I mean, just brilliantly. You need somebody in there who can kind of do that. And honestly, the only people that have been consistent in doing that, even though they've had their foibles as well, Jon Favreau, Dave Filoni. They know, like, okay, we can pull a little bit of here, we can pull this, we can reference this, we can do this, you know, we can harken back, but we can tell our own story. We can chart our own path and all of that. And that's, I think, at issue here. Kennedy is just... She just doesn't know this universe. She just doesn't, you know, that's why she had to have a course charted for her by directors and so forth, rather than doing it herself, or even placing people to do that. Got to have a change of leadership. And that also, talks about our second scoop that we can go into real fast. And I won't read the whole thing, but Sparrow comes back and says Kathleen Kennedy's leaving, and her departure will be celebrated at Star Wars Celebration. That's kind of the rumor as it exists today. We have been hearing quite a bit from the trades in the industry. I mean, even recently. Let me go ahead and share my screen here. It's going to be right. Here we go, right here. We'll get into that in a moment here. We're going to have this discussion. Just give us a second here. Let's see. This was the lawsuit that was filed by one of, I believe, the producers of The Acolyte, producer Karen McCarthy, for what they say is egregious behavior. But I want to take note here about how Deadline, kind of puts this here. Baller's executive producer Karen McCarthy has taken the Kathleen Kennedy-run Disney division to court over being pink-slipped from the Leslie Headland-created series last year after just a few weeks of work. Isn't that interesting how they're framing that? Oh, yeah. And OG, you made a very great point when it was like they're kind of giving them the Chapek, or giving her, I should say, Kathleen Kennedy, the Chapek treatment. All this bad news, not just this, but just the other day, we heard that all these projects were shelved, right? All this bad news all culminating at once. And we know Iger might have been a reason as to why that happened. Well, now he's in the big seat again. And now he's looking at everybody and going, accountability, accountability, accountability. Isn't this interesting?
Well, and Dre, here's the thing, too. In this new environment of accountability, where Disney is looking for any way to save a dime, because and to be fair, every studio is, we live in a different world right now.
We do.
But you have a studio head in Kathleen Kennedy who burns through money faster than a drunk sailor. She's hiring and firing directors, like pretty much every project. There's some sort of director problem. She's getting sued now, or they're getting sued now because of the Acolyte lady. That's going to cost them a pretty penny. So in this new age of accountability and where Disney is trying to save money, where does she fit in? I mean, she's burning through it like crazy, and they're not producing anything. I mean, they have Mando and a handful of Disney Plus shows, but they don't have any movies.
Nope.
The output's like down to it like a dribble, but I'm telling you. Yeah, go ahead.
They burned through so much talent. I mean, this is the talent that they have issues with, okay? David Benioff, D.B. Weiss, Gareth Edwards, Ryan Johnson, Colin Trevorrow, Phil Lord, Christopher Miller, Josh Trank, Patty Jenkins, Taika Waititi, Kevin Feige, Michael Waldron, Gina Carano, John Boyega, Karen McCarthy. All these people at Lucasfilm is kind of burned, let's say, right? And have made allusions to they're not going to work with Lucasfilm again, or there's no incentive to do that, or whatever. It's like that's an astounding amount of talent. When Disney has to create output for their streaming services and so forth and get people hooked, to burn that much talent and people talk to each other, can't have it. Can't happen. And now a red flag is being hoisted saying, "Don't do business with Lucasfilm. They're going to burn you," with Karen McCarthy's allegations here.
Yeah, no, exactly. Well, and her allegations, from what I understand, she not only lost her Acolyte gig, but she lost another gig because of this whole debacle. So not only is the mismanagement of Lucasfilm hurting the studio, but it's also affecting people's personal livelihoods and their careers even. I mean, this is crazy.
And she's saying she did work for the series. She should have had a, let's say 6-figure, 7-figure salary for the work that she did. And they're saying, well, we'll just pay you $5,000. It's like, what? Like, now these are some big problems. Now, if you go work for them, is what they're, this is what this lawsuit is telling the industry. If you go work for Lucasfilm and you do, and Kathleen Kennedy or any number of leadership over there has a conniption fit and throws you out, you ain't even gonna get paid. That's what she's saying right here, and that, I'm telling you, that's a death knell for talent relations at a studio where it takes creative talent to actually make these products go.
And that's what was Chapek's Achilles heel after the ScarJo thing. No one wanted to work for Disney anymore because of that whole mess. That's why I'm saying they are Bob Chapecking her. She is on the way out. The writing is on the wall. She's done. She's done. And by the way, I just want to give a shout out to Matt Flores. He says, just want to say, you guys bring it, going where a few other streamers dare. We appreciate it, gentlemen. Well, thank you, sir. We appreciate you, Matt Flores. Thank you so much, brother.
I see this as we were talking about this in the DM conversation that we were having earlier, and I see this as first of all, we put the wrong person in the wrong seat on the bus, right? Kathleen Kennedy is one of the best producers in the history of television. Campia called it when he said there are two types of John Campia. He said there's two types of producers. There are creative producers and there are get it done producers, right? I think what example did he use? Tomorrow I need 1,000 sharks to go in this lake. Go get them, right?
She's that person.
She's that person. She was great at that.
She's not the creative person. She's always been paired with a creative person, and she is awesome at getting them what they need. The problem is that she doesn't have anybody that's been identified as the person with the seat on the bus, who's the Kevin Feige, who says this is where everything's going. Now we can see what happens when you get involved in too many things, because Kevin Feige's having his own issues over with the MCU.
True.
However, he led Marvel for 20 years before, well, I should say 20 years, 21 movies, 23 movies, whatever it was, through Endgame that were amazing, like hit after hit after hit. The guy was like he was batting probably 600. The guy was just killing it. And I think that what we're seeing here is that people are starting to realize that there is going to be a power vacuum. They realize that what once was can no longer be. How do we know that? We know it because Chapek's out. Chapek's not doing what people want him to do. Iger comes back in. Iger looks at the scenario, and what has Iger done? Largely what Chapek had been doing. What's the difference? Iger has amazing PR, has amazing navigational skills to get out of tight squeezes that Chapek never had. So Iger's not behaving a lot different than Chapek was, but Iger's realizing I've got to shore up some of my big fleets. Let's just take the people out of the scenario. Look at what Disney's doing and say there's two things you can come to. What is Star Wars contributing to the bottom line? And the answer to that question is right now, not a whole lot, because they're maintaining subscribers of Disney Plus. But let's remember, Disney Plus is losing money for them overall. It's not gaining money for them. So if you're looking at that, you're going, okay, how much are you spending on The Mandalorian? Well, here's the problem, Star Wars. You've either got to come back and bring billion-dollar movies back into our purview so that we can make this revenue, or you're not going to be able to make Disney Plus series anymore. That's a losing proposition because they need content. So you got to get somebody in there who can bring billion-dollar movies back to the forefront. There's no other way to look at it. On a profit and loss statement, Star Wars is not good right now from a profit and loss statement. And so I think that we're essentially looking at the end of an era. We had the George Lucas era. We've had the Kathleen Kennedy era. I am one of those people that I do not hate on Kathleen Kennedy. I think Kathleen Kennedy has given us some amazing Star Wars content. However, she's gotten herself into a place where she's not producing billion-dollar movies. Well, that's a problem because Star Wars can deliver billion-dollar movies. So if you can't deliver that, you got to go. There's no other way around it. Mm-hmm. And so I think that in this power vacuum, we're seeing a lot of people go, I was told some things that I was going to get to do some things, and now I'm not being able to get to do them. And by the way, if you're Patty Jenkins, you're just sitting there going like, hey, Disney, I'm sitting on $1 billion movie. I'm Patty Jenkins, and I'm doing a Rogue Squadron movie. I'm sitting on $1 billion movie, and we're not doing anything about it. And I'm being told that I don't have a movie anymore. That's insane from a standpoint. So to me, it's not looking good for Star Wars, and they need to quickly transition into somebody who has a vision.
100%, Jay, 100%. And there's actually a joke. I actually saw this on Twitter, and I think it's a joke, but it actually summed up the situation with Lucasfilm and Kennedy kind of perfectly. Is it asked the question, how do you make millions of dollars? Well, you give Kathleen Kennedy billions.
There you go, right? That's pretty good. Boardwalk Times was writing about I believe Bob Iger's was a call today with Morgan Stanley. Is that right?
That's correct. Yes.
Okay. Bob Iger said this today on the future of Star Wars films. Quote, "We're going to make sure when we make one, it's the right one. So we're being very careful there." I don't think he's going to allow Kathleen Kennedy to make another Star Wars movie. I think that ship has sailed. I think he is waiting for new leadership, new direction, and he has to be, I think personally, convinced that is the direction that they should go. And look, if I'm looking at the whole slate, right, I'm looking at what is popular now, what is working now, what is going now, who are the Star Wars alum who really know this franchise, really know what the fans want, really creating the content that people are most invested in. They're in the building already. Jon Favreau, Dave Filoni. That's it. It was obvious years ago. It's obvious now. That's your consultation team. Now, if you want somebody else to lead, I suppose you can have that happen, right? However, Jon Favreau and Dave Filoni, they should be in a position in which the universe now can be crafted by their hand. That's the one thing I would mandate. But it's there, and I just think that Iger is looking at it going, this is not going to be this way for long, and to get rid of that power vacuum, somebody should be assigned thusly.
Well, in that Cameron Pasha scoop, if I'm not mistaken, there was some pretty heavy indication that Favreau is the guy, because supposedly he was having talks with Favreau about this kind of like this Ray situation and left Kennedy out of the loop, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, right? Yes, actually.
Yeah,
I think
that was part of it, I think.
That was part of that. So if that is to be believed, and again, this is, rumor until we know for sure, but it seems like they're courting Jon Favreau, or he's got the position kind of at least, not necessarily officially, but in Bob Iger's eyes, he's kind of already there. That makes sense, Trey, that they wouldn't really approve any movies right now if they know that she's on her way out soon and he's coming in soon. Why would you approve new films on her watch when Favreau's coming in 4, 5, 6 months? So, of course, you're going to put on hold and wait for the guy who is the long-term thing.
Yeah. Don't saddle the new guy with something. Go ahead.
I was going to say, especially because, ever since Disney took over, it has made some pretty odd decisions relative to the kind of content they wanted to produce. Now, when I say that, what I mean by that is, if you look at what Favreau and Filoni are doing with Star Wars, we just brought up specific examples where those two guys have been instrumental in bringing in parts of the extended universe, what we call Legends now, have specifically said, let's draw that back from being in Legends into canon. They did it with Thrawn. They did it with the Dark Troopers that we were talking about earlier.
True.
These guys. So I don't know why this happened, but somewhere along the line, somebody, and I don't think this was Kennedy, because it doesn't make sense for it to be Kennedy to me, but somebody along the line said, not Old Republic, High Republic, not let's change some of the things that actually people have loved about Star Wars. I get changing the Heir to the Empire series and making it a sequel trilogy series. I get the purpose behind that. However, though, even the way they did it and the people they chose to do it, it doesn't have the same Favreau, Filoni. We understand this wealth of riches that exists in the EU, that we can pull on some of those things and bring them in. And those are the kind of things that bring you money. How do you know that they bring you money? Because they've already brought you money. Because because Coder was a fantastically selling game. Like it's
proven.
It's proven. So
it's been tested. It's been proven. It's been, put through the ringer. Implement some of those things and run.
Exactly. It's mind-boggling that you would go, no, that won't work. It worked already. What else did you think you needed to do? So I think that Favreau and Filoni are the two people who understand that part of it, because guess what? They were us in those scenarios. They were playing the games. They were reading the Star Wars novels of that day. And so they know what works, because much like Feige, he's a Marvel comic book fan. And he goes, those stories work. And he brings those stories into the fold. So, I think we need somebody. I mean, I think anybody who doesn't think it should be Favreau and Filoni, I'm kind of like, well, who would be better? Like, who name somebody better? Because these guys are the guys that are killing it right now.
And it's interesting because you look at this Variety article that talks about all these products getting shelved by Jenkins and Kevin Feige and so forth. It says right here, at the time, The Mandalorian was a scrappy land speeder in the vast Star Wars galaxy, nipping at the heels of Rise of Skywalker, the culminating feature film from director J.J. Abrams that was expected just a month later to obliterate the box office like a cinematic Death Star. Instead, The Mandalorian became a global sensation thanks to an incandescent cuteness of Baby Yoda, blessing Disney Plus into Lightspeed with 26.5 million subscribers in its first 6 weeks. It talks about how Rise of Skywalker, on the other hand, imploded in spectacular fashion, all of that. It's interesting how they bring up Mandalorian so much and its success that it's had, and Jon Favreau and Dave Filoni and all that kind of stuff, while talking about the failures of this, this month in the Kathleen Kennedy administration. It's a very interesting thing. Are they setting seeds going, man, these guys work and maybe this gal doesn't? I think so.
Well, and look, if you want to go back to when Chapek was really going through it, and there were rumors, I mean, really more than rumors, but we'll call them rumors, that Bob Iger was sort of orchestrating in the background these hit pieces that were going into the trades.
Yep.
Bob Iger is a very connected guy.
Yep.
And look, I'm not saying for sure because we don't know for sure, but it very much rumored that he was kind of the one like behind these Hollywood trade hit pieces against Chapek to nick away at Chapek's credibility. And it's very, very coincidental that we're starting to see the same tactic used against Kathleen Kennedy.
Exactly.
Right? I mean, almost verbatim, the same tactic.
Yeah. Almost verbatim. It's very. This is a story to watch, folks. I think this is culminating to its finale conclusion sometime soon here, and Indiana Jones might end up being the swan song. We'll see.
Yeah, and there is one difference between the two of them, and that is that Kathleen Kennedy had a resume prior to her current role that Chapek just did not have.
That's true.
And it was a popular resume. So I do think the big difference we're going to see in the narrative is that, and we've seen this from people reporting on rumors about Celebration this year, is that it's going to be the swan song celebrating Kathleen Kennedy. And I think that is appropriate. And I think that it's different than Chapek. But what it does is, I mean, look, Iger is a master of manipulating things into being the way he wants us to see them. And I think that basically what he's doing here, to your point, OG, is he's manipulating things to say, for any of those out there who think that Star Wars is in a good place, I just want to prove to you that it's not.
Mhm.
We're going to go ahead and celebrate this person, and then we're going to move on. And I think that is really what's pretty much needed in Star Wars right now. So
it is,
yeah.
and really talent relations with Lucasfilm. You know,
Yeah.
that's not, you know, that's a big part of it too.
Yep.
And they paid a lot of money for this. They paid a lot of money for something that, look, they're in a tough place financially. They paid a lot of money for this asset. This asset has to produce something for them. That's just what it comes down to. Those three things are what it's going to come down to, and they're not producing the way that they should. I mean, when did Rise of Skywalker come out? That was in 2019.
2019.
So we're coming up on, by the time they actually were to film a movie and release it, it's going to be 5+ years since we've seen a Star Wars film in theaters. When the question is why? You know what I mean? Like, it's very odd, very odd.
I think there's a slot in 2025 for a Star Wars film. Will it make it? I don't know.
No.
That's a very odd thing, though. I mean, it's can you imagine? She's only been in the spot for almost 10 years, and I mean, where are we at? You know, are we in a better position than when we started? Oh no, new directions needed for sure.